George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. And we are so pleased to be joined by Dr. Scot Brown, Associate Professor of African American Studies and History at the University of California, Los Angeles, Westwood, California.
Yes.
West Side represent. Representing the west side of Southern California, Los Angeles, California. He studies Black music. He's a professor. He also is an author. His book, Fighting for Us, tells the story of the Black organization that is behind the Kwanzaa holiday. We know, founded by Dr. Maulana Karenga. You probably know him as Ron back in the day. But we're here to talk about...
I don't go that far back.
But Dr. Scot Brown, he's going to let me call him Scott in a minute, but he's also a musician, producer, and songwriter. Got a couple of songs out right now that we could talk about. Mm-hmm. And you are, and I learned this the other day, the go-to guy. I love Unsung. If you remember when they ask people about certain groups, you're the guy they go to. But here's the bottom line is, if you want the funk, if you want the funk, this is the brother you got to talk to, because we need the funk. We got to have that funk. Dr. Scot Brown, thank you so much. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on the show. It's really a treat, and we got to keep that funk flowing.
You know, let's all right. So let's talk about your connection to Central New York and Syracuse.
Sure.
We already know that you have a connection to Cornell University. Talk about that.
Well, I grew up in Rochester, New York, number one. So, Rochester sits 1 hour to the west is Buffalo, 1 hour to the east is Syracuse, right down that 90. So, when you live in an area like that, you have to think broader. So we used to come to Syracuse when I was younger, playing in bands. I used to see groups that performed in Syracuse. I used to go to a music store that to play and try out different instruments. We would come to Syracuse. So from our perspective, all three are part of the same kind of upstate New York vibe.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that. But you have some memories of the Qs. I saw you do a presentation recently when the Community Folk Arts Center did their Kwanzaa celebration, and you talked about some of the old places you used to visit in the Qs. Take us down memory lane. Talk to me.
Oh man, Syracuse was the place that had the one and only Sadie's place. All right. Now, if you were, because at the time I was a graduate student at Cornell University, so Ithaca's a nice college town, but if you really wanted to see a larger Black community, the closest one was about a 45-50 minute or so drive, and you made it to the Cuse, and we made it to Sadie's, and sometimes we would come to SU events, but on the weekend, get some folks in the car, make that road trip. And it was always a very welcoming community. One of my comrades at Cornell University was actually a community leader in Syracuse named Brian Sales, and actually he did a lot to do Kwanzaa and other community service events there. So we had some close connections, to Syracuse later on in life as well.
Yeah, so talk to me about your journey in music and your love of the funk. And by the way, you got some songs out and some music out right now, even as your professor at UCLA. You got some music out right now. What do you have out right now?
Right now I have two singles out. One is called Last Man, and that's featuring Mr. Rick on vocals, and featuring Rick Marcel on guitar, and another professor at UCLA who did the rap on that version, named Breon Bain. So two of the people that are featured on that song are also from my band that I grew up playing with in Rochester. We still are a kind of songwriting, producing team of sorts. And I had that song done, and I let Breon Bain is a anti-mass incarceration activist or modern abolitionist. And he teaches theater and does a lot of work in the prisons. He's a spoken word artist, a rapper, very talented brother. And so he heard this song, and then he blessed it with some bars.
Love it. And then you have another song out.
Yeah, the other song out is a collaboration with a real musical genius, Oheni Savant, who's a rapper and multi-instrumentalist. He raps on my song, Scottronix. That was a funny kind of song because I wrote that music and played that music, and Oheni Savant had come out to Los Angeles. He had a meeting with Dr. Dre. And because of schedules, the meeting was delayed one day. So he was in Los Angeles, didn't know a whole lot of folks. He had a friend of his who came out with him, but he was just sort of here with not a lot to do. So I said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to find my best beats. And when he comes over, I'm going to play him and just see what happens. So he fell right into it because one of the beats I played he liked, and then he started freestyling too. And that's why the first line in that song, I'm the artisan listening to Parliament, that's on the song Scottronix, because he looked up at my wall and saw that I had a picture from the album Aqua Boogie by Parliament, Motor Booty Affair. That album I got the artwork, a print of that artwork with some accents done by the original artist, Overton Lloyd. And he looked up at that and he just started rhyming. And so got him on tape, and I was like, I'm gonna have to do something with this. So I kept on doing it. We cut some other things over, and that's the latest single.
Tell me about your love of the funk, though.
The funk came from really my era. I was into music at an early age, so my favorite bands, like at 7, 8, 9 years old, were groups like the Ohio Players.
Are you from Dayton? You're from Dayton, right?
No, I'm from Rochester.
Oh, Rochester. You did say that. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm writing a book on funk bands from Dayton, but that came because 3 out of my top 10 bassists happen to come from there. Marshall Jones from the Ohio Players, Marvin Craig from Lakeside, and of course, legendary Mark Adams from Slave.
Right.
So I wanted to always know what made that. And then I found out that Dayton is a lot like Rochester and Syracuse in that it's blue collar towns where people had porches, garages, basements, and groups rehearsed. And so that story really is an extension of the kind of community that I grew up in and played music in as a kid. So the first band that I played in some groups in middle school, and then in high school, I was in a group called Radiance.
Uh-huh. And you grew up in Rochester. You said that. I don't know why I said Dayton, but I heard Dayton. So you talked to you came to my attention because you're a good friend of Tanisha Jackson, because you were featured for the Kwanzaa event, and your theme was "We Are One," and it was really talking about unity. Expand on that message.
Well, one thing about this notion of the one is something that's talked about in funk music a lot. So not just being one as a people, but being on the one, yes, being centered. And James Brown really is the one who articulated that idea of, if you listen to the way he does his funk. So there are stories of like bass players like Bootsy Collins. Bootsy is like a Jimi Hendrix on bass. Mm-hmm. He makes all kinds of incredible sounds and movements. And so he tells stories about he got with James Brown, and James Brown says, I know you can play, but the question is, can you play on the one? And then people looking like, well, what do you mean on the one? And say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And so that's where the groove is from that perspective on funk. And it comes to also symbolize the unity from music, also the way that we have our own individual roles to play. And as long as we are all on the one, we work together in great synchronicity as a people, as a community, as humanity. So that is the way that I talk about being on the one. Frankie Beverly saying we are one is something that is very important to hear, because you're constantly being fed negative ideas about what is possible as a community. You know, if you have something negative, if it bleeds, it leads on the news. How many great success stories do we get to hear? And so Kwanzaa, like that song, We Are One, is one of those real interventions, one of those real moments where we can reflect on, you know, not just the obstacles yet to overcome, but what we've achieved. And I hear that in the song, and that was part of my message at the event on Kwanzaa.
Yeah.
So I know this might sound like it's going all over the place, but from my perspective, the art, the intellectual work, and the activism, they're all connected. And that's the reason why I can bounce from history to Kwanzaa to music to the community. It's all connected in this idea of being on the one and being really motivated by building unity.
So we've got Kwanzaa. The first day of Kwanzaa actually is Unity, right? And that
That's right.
starts a week from today, which is the 26th Sunday, when we're and so because it's a week from today, and you talk about unity and all of that, you wrote a book called Fighting for Us, which tells the stories of the US organization
Yes.
that is behind the celebration of Kwanzaa. Talk to me. Tell us about that story and give us a sense of the background of that as we talk about those 7 principles. Umoja, Kujijakalia, Ujima, Ujama, Nia, Kuumba, Imani.
Yes, those are very important principles. I came into contact with the whole idea of the Nguzo Saba and Kwanzaa when I was at school at the University of Rochester. And in the community, we had a bookstore called Kitabu Kingdom, right? And then there was another Black bookstore here in Syracuse that I used to go to as well, right? That was, I believe, started by, we knew him as Brother Oliver. And I
Oliver
think,
Johnson.
right. And he was like a martial artist.
Yes.
Healthy
Aikido.
living, brother. I mean, that brother, you went to that bookstore, you got more than just a book. You got some life lessons from that brother. And so that was an important part. But in Rochester, the person who really was a part of Kitabu Kingdom, who started, was Gerald Shaka and his wife, Terry Shaka. And so that bookstore was a cultural center in the sense that we didn't just go there to read books. I mean, we went there for lessons, and he mentored a lot of us. I was one of his mentees, and he's the one who planted the seeds in my head to go to graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying, look, brother, I see you studying, I see you trying to do something, but you really want to go past just the basics and get more in depth. And no one had really said anything like that to me before about what was possible from an education standpoint. So I said to him, if I ever get a PhD, I'm going to write the history of the group you were in called the US organization, and how, because I knew nothing about the group.
Right.
And then I found that the only things that were said about the group were usually from the standpoint of people that never were really interviewing the folks in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I got to the book Fighting for Us. And then I met some of my funk heroes were connected to the US organization, like James Mtume. James Mtume is Mtume because he's a member of US. And, you know, he went on to write The Closer I Get to You with Reggie Lucas, and Back Together Again, and You Know How to Love Me, Phyllis Hyman, and Stephanie Mills, What You Gonna Do With My Lovin'. Then he goes on as a solo artist to do, of course, Juicy, you know, You, Me, and He, and all those hits. So again, the emphasis with Mtume is really what I'm about. He was like, look, I was an activist, jazz musician, songwriter, all of that stuff is connected. Art, he would say to me, he still says this, the highest form of art is intellect, and the highest form of intellect is art. That's a false separation between the two. And so that has really become something that's a part of what I'm about. If you read the book Fighting for Us, you'll see I have a chapter called Us and the Arts of War, where I deal with poets like Baraka, and I deal with the Herbie Hancock when he changed his name to Mwandishi, and all these things are connected. And then I also deal with, the origins of Kwanzaa. I deal with the concept that I talked about at the lecture, operational unity, and how that built the momentum around the Black Power conferences. All that is a part of the tapestry of what I'm telling in that story.
So what does US stand for?
US stands for us.
Okay.
It's a pronoun. Black folks, us. As opposed to them. Hey, check out it's real slick if you think about it, because the mantra for the group was, anywhere we are, us is.
Us is, yes.
That's us.
So it's not abbreviated for anything else.
It's not an acronym, but when they got into some struggles with other organizations, just like when you have rival factions, they tend to make fun of each other. So they had a kind of clash at one point with the Black Panther Party and some other groups. And one of the things that they would say deriding the group was to call them United Slaves.
So talk to me about the origin of Kwanzaa from your research.
The origins of Kwanzaa is really, if you think about the cultural origin is something that's been in practice in African cultures throughout the diaspora, being first fruit celebrations. So because of the history of Black folks and the land and the harvest, so that's the concept, and they are all over.
Let me be specific with my question. How did the US organization lead to the development of this holiday, Kwanzaa, with Maulana Karenga? Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
One thing that was interesting about the US organization was that they were always trying to create alternatives. So their motto was, anything that you take away, you have to replace with something of equal or greater value. That's a very important lesson, because one thing to condemn something, it's another thing to have something so that whole organization was about trying to create a context that would demonstrate to Black people, even though we're in struggle, what does liberation look like?
Right.
See what I mean? It's one thing to say, we need to get rid of this, we need to change this, but what does victory look like? Their attitude was, you don't have to have this climactic moment of the revolution before you can have a vision for what victory is. So naming ceremonies, holidays, Kwanzaa was not the only one. The Dabihu, which was the commemoration of the Malcolm X's martyrdom, all these things were there. Now, Kwanzaa took hold. It comes around the holiday season, so people in that organization gravitated towards it, but it was always one that people in the organization celebrated, but it was always also open to people in the community as well. Now, the people in the organization who live their lives around the 7 principles, obviously it takes on an even more profound meaning, but it always had, even at the first Kwanzaa in 1966, there were people who were not in the US organization who came, who saw it really just as an opportunity to celebrate something that's African inspired, that's positive. Because remember, in the 60s, you got Tarzan, you got Black people saying things like, I'm glad my ancestors took that butt whooping so we could be here in America. You have, ain't nothing African about me. So Malcolm X's idea was, you can't love the fruit if you hate the root. And so US would create rituals, holidays, ways of being, and Kwanzaa is one of them. Now, it took off but in its original phase, it's part of an entire attempt to make a cultural revolution.
So was it talking with Dr. Scot Brown, African American Studies professor of history at UCLA, and also a funk music historian. Yes.
African American Studies, UCLA. Yeah.
What did I say?
You said history. I wanted to, make sure I get
African American Studies. I thought I said African American Studies first, but all right, we good.
That's all right. I'm just checking. I got to make sure now, because I can't have my peoples mad at me when they
Nah,
hear this.
we got you. We got you. African American Studies and History at
Right.
UCLA.
Yeah.
And so, was the original idea that this would replace Christmas? Because I know they make it clear that it's not about replacing Christmas, but in the original thought, was that what they were thinking?
Well, I think in the organization,
Mm-hmm.
in the us organization, it was no, but our organization was really about alternatives and not just Christmas. It was alternatives to Western life, period, right?
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but there was always this ecumenical or broader because the us organization was an organization that also was a community center too. So it also was a place for people who really wanted a positive Black experience. So right at the outset of the holidays practice, there were people for whom it was an extension of their commitment to the ideology of the organization. But there were also people like you and I who have friends in the group that said, man, I'm about to go to some Black stuff, man. You know what I'm saying? What you doing,
Right.
George? You ain't doing nothing, man. Come on over here and check this thing out. And then we would go and say, wow, that's incredible. They got this thing named Guzo Saba. And so just the idea of having principles with an African language, as opposed to what we were trained to think that African language is some gibberish, right? And real language is Shakespearean. Now we're getting into deep concepts. So that would be for you and I back then a transformative moment.
Yeah.
So that's why they can say, really, it's not an alternative to Christmas for those who are engaged in the cultural knowledge. But now, of course, if you take, for instance, an event like you take the group, the Nation of Islam, right? Their Savior's Day, they have a big thing. Now, Savior's Day is different if you're in the nation, but obviously that's such a huge event. It draws all kinds of folks who want to hear the message. So there's always that dual purposing that's happening when we deal with these things. I know that's a complex answer, but it's still simple. No, it's not an alternative across the board.
So what do you believe Kwanzaa stands for in our culture right now? And do you think that every African American should be celebrating it?
Well, you know, I shy away now from the idea of what everybody should do.
Uh-oh. All right. You're
The
hedging on me, bro. You're hedging.
reason why is because, you know what? Success needs no explanation, and failure can never be explained.
Okay.
When you're winning, brother, you don't have to worry about trying to convert somebody.
Well,
they come to you. And as you see with time, we're seeing young people want to know more about their history. You see, movies like the Black Panther, for instance, show you that there is a longing for an alternative sense of who we are as a global community. And so Kwanzaa was doing this thing in 1966 when it was just maybe, 50, 40, however many people came, maybe 100. But whatever that was, those folks, it didn't matter that everybody knew. And I think that same spirit is here. It's growing, but, we're not going to, I think, ever get to a point where there aren't people who feel that they have a different idea about what freedom is. So some people have a focus on one aspect of it, but Kwanzaa, what it represents is the spirit of resistance, because no other people that I shouldn't say no other people, few other people have had to deal with the assault on their heritage. So in other words, part of American racism is tied up in the defamation of Africa, right? That's actually a linchpin of the argument of us being second-class citizens and subhuman, is to actually say that Africa is a stepchild. It's
right.
Look at all these great philosophers who said Africa was something that was abnormally different. And so because of that, we're going to have a series of different struggles over the duration of our time that try to actually create a liberated zone that frees up our thinking. And that never is going to stop. It's going to keep growing.
Well, but there are some people who are even listening and watching this that don't even know how to do it, or they somehow think it's replacing their celebration of Christ in Christmas, although the tree ain't got nothing to do with it, but that's a whole other thing. And
Right.
neither does Santa Claus. But my question really is, so you say you shy away from saying everybody should celebrate it, but I offer an alternative. I say to people, look, you may not understand all the symbols, you may not understand all the ways of practicing, but what you can do is light a candle for unity, for self-determination, for collective work and responsibility, for cooperative economics. You can emphasize Zawadi, gifts that are handmade or of educational value, right? You can talk about the foundation and the symbols of that. Like, you may not know have all the candles and know how to light all the principles and all of that, and you may not be able to do all of that, but I do think from the perspective of an affirmation of our culture and our heritage, that is our heritage. This is a holiday that was created in the United States for African Americans, but building on the diasporic traditions of our culture. So
I think you're right. You know what? Hey, this shows you that we having a real dialogue. I'm gonna change my position, brother George. I think you're giving me another perspective
I
on this,
appreciate
brother.
that, brother.
I'm gonna change everybody should celebrate it, because unless something's really out there, you know you're not against unity.
Right.
You know you're not against self-determination.
Right.
You know you're not against collective work and responsibility.
Huh?
You know you're not against cooperative economics. You know you're not against purpose. You know you're not against faith. So since all those, or creativity, I'm sorry, I jumped
And
over.
faith, but I see, but you caught it. You got you. You got it.
I'm into, when I say them in English, it's actually harder.
Right.
Than
Just
when
go
I
with
say them
the Swahili.
Umoja, Kuji Chagalia, you know what I mean? Ujima, Ujaman, Nia, Kuumba, Imani. See, that rolls.
Yeah.
Into the English part.
Right.
But you know those things are positive, right?
Yes.
And because you know those are positive, and because you can look around today and see that we are dealing with an avalanche of negativity within our community and in the wider world, in the wider nation and world, having a moment where you reflect on something that you can hold yourself and your community and your family accountable to is a good thing. So I would agree with you. I think everybody should. The reason why I'm a little skeptical is because one of the bad raps that sort of black-minded nationalist types, get is that we always telling folks what they should do.
Okay. Let me.
That's why I'm a little smooth with it, because I'm like, let me win and show you. Let me show you that this is the better way, rather than tell you you should do it.
Right. And should is a different thing. But I guess where I was going with it is that there are people that just don't know what to do.
That's true.
So even if they wanted to do it, it's something that we want to make accessible to them, so that they can have an idea of what to do. Because, what do I do with the
symbols? Make it accessible.
Let's make it accessible.
Let's make it accessible. Let's demystify it.
Demystify it. So you
sometimes it's just a matter of doing the translations, because a lot we live in a culture and a society that doesn't value learning even other European languages, let alone learning African languages, right? So we gotta, sometimes people hear, well, what? No, I can't say this right. Kujichaga, what? And then they feel that because they can't say it rolling the way we do, that somehow that means that it's not for me, man. But actually, it's up to us to tell people and to explain to people that, look, We get in where you fit in. This is a positive
Right.
moment, and let's keep building on it. It's
Here,
okay
here's
if you
my
don't pronounce
here's
something perfectly.
here's my analogy, Dr. Brown. Check this out. My analogy is this: does everybody celebrate Christmas the same way? Right?
Absolutely not.
No. So why do we? So people don't. That's why I tell people, if you can't find the red, black, and the green candle, go to the store down the go to the candle place or to your favorite big box store. Get you a candle and light it and talk about the principles with your family. Here's the thing that's really powerful that I want to
Mm,
share with you is that we have connected, and COVID this year will make it different, so we'll do it virtually. But over the years, we have shared Kwanzaa with the Charles family, and we sit around, and I've done many different kinds of celebrations, community celebrations, but the most meaningful celebrations occur, Doc, when I'm with it's two of us families. Is all told, I think it's like 10 of us or so because of or 11, however many. But we then sit down and we do the ceremony, and then we create a table of affirmation, and then we share hopes, dreams, and um, wishes for the following year. Now this year, and as I've been telling everybody this year, last year I had everybody write their thoughts, hopes, and dreams in a letter to themselves, and I'm going
mm,
to mail those letters this week, right? I'm going to mail those letters this week, and we're going to see, because we have found that the collective power and affirmation through our ancestors and ourselves has produced the things that we have wanted. I mean, we have said in that on that table, we have wanted this, and I don't want to mean, it's not about a material thing, but I'm saying some things that we needed to overcome obstacles in our lives, or things that we needed to affirm in our lives, and we have seen those things come into fruition. Um, and so that's what I'm saying to you. It's that sort of communal understanding and collective that can produce results. So I'm offering that to you in the audience, that it's much deeper than some symbols. It's really about collective affirmation, not only of ourselves, but our culture and our traditions,
yes.
along with our families. And so you know more about this than me. I'm just
No,
saying.
man, but I agree with you 100%. And I love the fact that that's the spirit of Kwanzaa, because it's about really, I mean, there's so many things. I remember when I've celebrated Kwanzaa in the 80s in school, and we were students. We were broke. We didn't have money to buy gifts for people, but we actually, at one point, talked about things that we would do for someone. So it was a pledge. So the gift could be, you know what, I'm going to help you with, I know you're struggling in French class. We're going to
Right,
sit
right.
down together, and I'm going to help you with this. I'm going to show you this, or time we can spend. Or, I have a car, you come with me when I go grocery shopping, X, Y, and Z. So there were things that, and I think Kwanzaa is very meaningful in that way, because the transaction is not a transaction of commodities. It's a transaction of values and practices that reinforce those values.
I
That's what's so beautiful.
Let me ask you to finish off with, and sort of, since you got the music, you got the African American studies and history, and and you talked about your book that you're writing about 70s R&B and funk. What does Round this out for us? What does the music mean, or should mean, to our community and the historical context of it?
Black music is a resource.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about colonialism, liberation, and independence, so much of what nations have to do is to get control over their own resources,
Mm-hmm.
so that those resources benefit the people that produce it. So if you think about Black music like oil, it's a resource we produce, but it fuels the world and it makes money for everyone in many cases, with the exception, proportionately, of those who produce it. So it's an organic part of our being, in that music is so central to the Black cultural experience. It's the way that we communicate It's a way that we resist. It's a way that we create a vision of Imani or faith during difficult times, right? Whether it be the work songs during enslavement, whether it be the songs of the civil rights movement, whether it be the liberation songs we hear today, on and on and on. What we have not made, I think, comparable mileage in is to create music and also create opportunities for our community to control that resource.
Talk to me.
So that's where, if you're talking about Black freedom, usually when we talk about music, we're usually talking about lyrics, chords, notes. So from a Black studies perspective, an African American studies perspective, when we talk about music, we also ask questions about power. See, so who is a song making money for? So on my song, which I can play for you, Scottronix, the hook is Scottronix, avant-garde phonics. I fuse metaphysical themes with ebonics. So metaphysical for me is just really a signifier for something deep, and ebonics meaning accessible. We have not really made accessible to our community ways in which we can organize. We know how to organize the protests, but we also have to organize, and even organizing economically, we have to think about the things that we actually create. So a lot of the milestones, I love the work, for instance, that LeBron James has done in the area of sports, and thinking about agents and thinking about other jobs that can be created through that. But we also have a lot of work to do in music. We have a lot of Black executives that were on the scene, but we also are constantly learning. There are these other things: publishing, licensing. The idea of music is not just the sound. So think about all the jobs that come with the music industry, be it a tour bus driver, manager, a makeup artist. That's part of what constitutes, in my opinion, a cultural revolution. When you start to think about your culture in relationship to economic and political empowerment. So how do I say this? I'm going on, but I'm trying to explain to you why I feel so strongly about this. As an African American studies professor, one of the ironies of being in African American studies is that we were so rushing to make sure that we were strong in politics that in many cases we left alone some things that were hidden in plain sight. So we still to this day have a lot of Black studies departments that don't have music as central. And I'm not talking about, see, a lot of times, again, it's thinking about music. If you think about it from a Black studies perspective, and a Black studies perspective always asks, how does this or that affect power relationships to our community? It's a different way of thinking about your art, your music, your commerce. It's a different value.
So bringing it on home, if you think about all of that, they all relate back to these principles of Kwanzaa. Ujama, Ujima, right? Kujichagulia. It all relates in some ways to that, because and I love your focus. You talk about in some ways you're saying follow the money, but also what does the money do, and what is the power? How does the power impact how that money is made?
There's also a spiritual element to this, brother. Somewhere down the line, we're going to have a reckoning. And I do believe that we should be able to speak about all aspects of Black life. However, I do think that corporate interests that don't have our community's best interests at heart, are exceedingly influential in what kind of music gets heard. And we have this great moment with social media and indie artists that is now stepping over those gatekeepers. But you should not have to work hard to hear a song like you're a shining star no matter who you are. You should not have to work hard to hear a song that ends with, everybody's got a little light under the sun. You should not work hard, brother, to hear a song like Be Real Black for me. You see what I'm saying? That should not be something that you have to actually, but there was a moment where that was part of our everyday soundscape. That was part of our everyday, and there is a spiritual element, because I do, and I'm not, now this is where I'm stepping out of my professor role. I'm not a scientist of sound and behavior, but I do in my heart believe that music has this affirmative ability that shapes the way people feel about what is possible, how they treat each other, how we talk to each other. I do believe that if you constantly hear negative things about yourself, antagonistic things about your community, that there, I don't know where that point is. I don't know if it's 0.5, I don't know if it's 10, whatever the poor proportion of that, it has an effect. I think it does have an effect. And I do think that rather than, I'm coming now from the standpoint like the US organization did with Kwanzaa, rather than spend all my time saying, y'all need to stop saying this, y'all need, I'm gonna say, hey, you know what? I wanna be the liberation example that I'm looking for.
Amen.
And we can do that now more than we ever can. We can reach people. This show right here is an example of the spaces that we can seize and occupy for a purpose of building the kind of freedom dreams and freedom results. And that's where I'm coming from as an artist, and that's my analysis. That's a long-winded answer, but that's why I'm so passionate about the music, brother.
Dr. Scot Brown is a professor of African American Studies and History and an author. A couple of books. Look for his 70s funk book that's coming out. And he's also author of the book Fighting for Us, telling us about the origin history of Kwanzaa, but also infusing that with a conversation about history and the history of music and the importance of music. But more importantly, that this is what really hit me, the idea of music as a tool of liberation through song and effort and activism. And your music, Doc, we hope and know is a part of that. How do we find your music, bro?
You can find it on Spotify. We can find it on YouTube. Dr. Scot Brown, that's me. And the two songs that are out now, one is called Last Man Remix. And there's another one called Scottronix. And you just look under Dr. Scot Brown, you get those two songs. I don't know if you wanted me to play anything now or you wanted to mix that in later, sir, however you wanted to do it.
By the time people get to the end of this, they will have heard all of that. So why don't you throw us a little song on right now before we go?
Okay, before we go, I'm going to play a little bit of Last Man, and this is featuring vocalist Mr. Rick Marcel, and Breon Bain.
Very nice. Inspiration for the nation. Beautiful.